Okay, so this is the second day of week 1. I want to first take any questions about this week's assignments. Does anyone have questions that they need addressed? Yes?
For that paper to turn in, this one?
Yes.
So
you have
this
a
is
paper to
also-
turn in. You have to print out this handout and turn it in.
By Friday?
Yep.
Okay. That's confused on.
Okay. Yeah, what's confusing you?
Because the other paper is saying that this is going to be, like, discarded by Friday or something.
I don't know what you're talking about. Does anyone know what she's talking about? We don't know what you're talking about. You have to print that paper, which you've done. You have to follow all those steps. Some of them require you to fill in blanks, which you'll notice require you to do the quizzes, produce the quiz codes. And then that paper goes into the bin at the back of the lab at 11:26 by 3 p.m. on Friday.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Other broad questions about the assignments for this week? All right, someone asked before we started class, are the quizzes open book? Quizzes are always open book. Tests, no, but quizzes are open book. Tests will be closed book. Quizzes are reviews. I expect you to be in the book finding the answers, actually. Okay? All right, so let's get going. What we did on Monday was to begin to cover the basic structure of the HTML document. And we made a sample web page with very little content in it that had these parts that you see on the slide. I want to remind you that the tags are not case sensitive, so this doesn't have to be uppercase, these don't have to be lowercase. You do not need to worry about spaces or pressing enter between tags, but in the middle of a tag, for example, in the middle of the doc type tag, there is a space required between the word doc type and HTML. In the HTML opening tag, there is a space required between HTML and the language attribute. I also want to remind you that some tags have closing tags associated with them. That's true for HTML. Here's the HTML tag, and the closing tag is down at the bottom. Closing tags begin with a /, and then they repeat the tag name. Not all tags have closing tags. Notice the document type does not, and then the meta tag, which is not on this slide, does not. But most do. Okay? The last thing I want to remind you is that sometimes, in fact often, tags are inside other tags. So, for example, the head and body tags are actually inside the HTML tag because the HTML tag opens and then it doesn't close till after the body tag closes. And I see an error in the slide. Did y'all see that? Shout out when you see craziness, okay? All right, so that's how that works. I have head nested, we call it, and body nested inside of HTML. We also, on Monday, put a title into the head and a meta tag and a paragraph tag inside Hello World. They are nested inside of those categories. And remember I told you you've got to memorize all these. So the more you do it, the more you're going to be able to memorize them. And by do it, I mean type them in. We also talked about that we choose the tags that we want to use based on the meaning of the content. If the content is a list, we'll choose one of the types of list tags to use. If the content is a heading, we'll choose one of the 6 heading tags to use. We don't choose our HTML tags because of how they look. We choose them because of the type of content. We'll worry about how things look later when we learn CSS. All right. Common errors that you might make, I mentioned on Monday, the first one is the most common, forgetting to close a tag where there is a set. The HTML tag set has an open and closed version. Forgetting to do that, that's not good. Misspelling a tag, misspelling an attribute, quotation marks that aren't in sets. In other words, 2 quotation marks are needed, one on either side of an attribute, for example. And then incorrect file names or incorrect paths, and we'll see what paths mean later in our context. But the file names for HTML files don't have any spaces, and the folder names for the web have no spaces. So don't put spaces into file or folder names. All right. I would like next to open the file we created the other day, our web page. So I'm going to go back to where I stored it and find it. Now,
Files or what? No spaces in files or what?
you can go back through the recording about files and folders. All right, here's our page that we made the other day. We just named it First Web Page because that's what we decided to. All right, it has a .html file extension, and that's why in the type column it says to open it with a browser. In my case, my default browser on this computer is Chrome, so it says that. It might just say HTML document, or it might say Firefox document. And it needs to be a browser name or HTML there. And that comes just because you have the correct file extension. Yes?
I don't think I have that. I don't think anyone made one of those on this computer.
Then that's too bad. What did you want me to do about the fact that you don't have one at the new computer where you sat? Got no ideas. Okay. If you move around, you do find that there will be various things at the computers, and you all have login credentials that you use to get into a computer, which means that the files that you're looking at on the computer are actually the ones created by you only, not by the previous person. So if you move, then things won't be there. This is a good time probably for me to talk to you about how in general we run computer classes, because I think there's some confusion there. Because we record them, we often don't repeat ourselves, and that's an issue that you and I were just having. I'm not trying to be rude, but it's recorded, you can go back, and it's like the 4th time I've said it in 2 days. Okay, so that'll happen. The other thing is that although we're up here typing, we're not requiring you to type. Eduardo has a nice pose here. He's absorbing everything. I love it when you take notes. You did that the other day. But what I'm wanting you to do is to pay attention. And if the typing interferes with that, then don't type now. Type later. I'm not going to catch you up. I'm not going to keep re-showing you what I did. I want you to absorb what I'm giving you. Now, you've got to pay attention. You can't just sit there like a pod. But you don't have to type along with me. You'll never be able to keep up with Mr. Wiggins if you're in his class. He's like a speed typer. All right? So just try to pay really close attention to what we're doing. And then you can go back and look at the videos later. All right, so here's our page. And if I double-click this icon, it's going to open it, as it's promising, in the browser Chrome, which is fine. I'll do that. There's our little page with our title in the tab and our paragraph here for Hello World. But that's not going to allow me to edit that HTML code. I need to get into Notepad. There are 2 ways to get into Notepad. You can right-click the icon and choose Open With and find Notepad in the list. And if it's not in the list, like mine, you can go down to choose another app and locate it. That's a way to do it, all right? The other way to do it, which I really prefer, is just to go ahead and open Notepad first. So I'm going to do my normal search for it down here. Go to the File menu, choose Open. This is exactly where I stored it. It's right there. In fact, if we look, it's actually right here. You can't see it because the way the windows are stacked. So I'm at the right location, but I don't see it. I don't see it because the type setting in the drop-down near the Open button says to look for .txt file extensions. But that's not the file extension for the web. What is the file extension we used? .html. So it's filtering for .txt only. If I change that drop-down to all files, so it don't feel like when we saved it, suddenly all the files that are in that folder will be visible. the Word files, the PDF files, and thankfully my HTML file is right here. So I'm going to double click it on the icon to open it up. There's our code. I'm going to close that because what I promised to do today was to sort of step back through again what we did on Monday before we moved on. So I'm going to step back through the process of creating your first web page. And I'm going to add to that today the concept of a root folder. In this class, you will want to make a root folder for every assignment. So when you have a lab assignment next week, we begin by you creating a root folder. In the real world of web development, that is exactly what real web programmers do as well. So we're going to do that. So I need a folder to be my root folder. I am in Windows Explorer. If I go to Home, there's a nice new folder button. I'm going to name this Second Web Page Folder. No spaces in the folder name. That is now where I want to store my new page, inside of the Second Web Page folder. That's new, making a root folder. Let's open Notepad. I'm not even going to type anything. I'm just going to go ahead and do my save. File, save as. I want to be in the Second Web Page folder. Who remembers the next thing I need to do?
Change it to all.
Very important, yes. Change it to all files. Because if I don't, it'll put .txt on the end, which you don't want. Right? Next, new concept. Every website has a home page. When you type in a domain name like atc.edu, you go to a page. That's the home page. Every home page needs a specific name that the web server recognizes. In this class, that name will always be index.html. So if you are making a home page for your root folder, which you will do every week, you will always name it index.html. If you're making a second page or a third page for that same root folder, it will be named something different. But the home page, the one I want to come up immediately when I go to my domain, will be named index.html. Let's save that. Now it's time to type in our tags. The first tag is the document type. Then we open the HTML set with the language attribute.
Good question.
And because it's a set, I'm going to go ahead and close it right away so I don't forget. And I left space in between by pressing enter. Yes, question.
Is there a default HTML language, or will it just randomly pick one if you don't select it?
It will pick the one that's been established in the browser or the operating system if you don't select it. That's not a good practice.
Basically, if it's open in America, it'll run fine, but if it's open in Spain, it will crash.
It's a good idea. All right, after HTML, we have the head section. It also needs to be closed. And after the head, we have the body. This is the basic structure of the HTML page as we learned it on Monday. The head needs two tags. The tag set for the title and the meta tag. Doesn't matter which one you put first. I typically put the title first, but it doesn't matter. And I indented the other day because that was helpful for you to see it. That's also not necessary, but it does help to see it. Title tag. That's our basic structure with the head filled in. Now I need a title. Every page needs a title. This is going to be the home page for my second website, so I'm going to put second website home. Let's save that. Go to Windows Explorer, into our website root folder, double click the icon, there's our page. We haven't added any content into the body, so we don't see anything in what's called the viewport here. But we do see the title that we entered in the tab. So that's a review of what we learned on Monday, together with two new concepts, the root folder and naming the homepage. Back down to Notepad, and let's start adding some more tags. We need some content. Now, as we add HTML tags, you will notice that some of the tags that we choose will force a line break above and below them, and some will not. So we're introducing you initially, right out the gate, to the concept of the display property, which is built into the tags. If a tag forces a line break above and below it, it's called a block display tag. If it does not, it's called inline. In the slides, I will be showing you tags, as I've done here on the paragraph slide, and I will put a notation at the slide heading, whether it's block or inline, meaning that I expect you to notice that and pay attention to it. There will come a day when this will be really important. Okay. We put in a paragraph the other day. Let's put in a couple of paragraphs here. And because we're too lazy, we're going to make short paragraphs. We'll make a paragraph that says, this is paragraph 1. And another one that says, you won't be surprised, it says, this is paragraph 2. Save that, go back to the browser, refresh button, I'm going to zoom like I always do in class. Now you can see what I was talking about. The paragraph tag is a block tag. So it includes a hard return, think of pressing enter, above and below, a line break we call it. If I put a third paragraph, it would be on the next line. They're not side by side. Back in Notepad, if we put these on the same line, in the source code we call it, and save it, and refresh it, it will still be the same. Because the reason that the paragraphs are on separate lines is because that tag is a block display.
It's not
Now-
showing up on mine.
When we nest elements, which we've done in our code with head and body inside of HTML, title inside of head, paragraphs inside of body, when we nest elements, we want to be sure that we close the elements that we just opened. What I'm trying to say is, in the case of the paragraph, we opened it and closed it and then did the same thing again. That's correct. If we instead close the first paragraph after we open the first one, that would be incorrect. That's incorrect nesting. We're going to learn about another tag. I'll just demonstrate it right now, called strong, which will make things appear bold, but the point of them is to say to the screen readers, this is important. So if I add a strong tag, for example, here, then I want to close it right here. Because in proper nesting, you close the last thing open first. I don't want to close it over here. That's incorrect tagging. The browser will still look fine. I'll notice it when I grade. So to correctly nest, we're going to close the last thing we opened first. That's what we're talking about with incorrectness. When you write HTML, it's easy to make mistakes. Typing mistakes, for example, are very common. Forgetting to close tags are very common. So what you can do is when you've written your web page and you're pretty happy with it, you can go to one of these two URLs on the web, upload your code, and it'll check it for you. You won't find every error, but it will find many errors, and therefore it's helpful. And I will allow you to use these validators even on a test. So if you're taking the test and you're freaked out because who isn't when they take a test, you'll have this as sort of a fallback plan. You'll say, okay, I did my best, and I'm going to run it through the validator, we call it, by uploading my file, and it'll find a bunch of errors if I made them. Like I said, it's not 100% accurate. You still might make an error that it didn't catch. And every once in a while it yells about things that aren't really important. But I would recommend you use it and get used to using it so that when test time does come, it's a wonderful sort of relaxation moment when you run it and it all comes back nicely. Or not, and you fix it. And there's some slides, and your book has content on that as well, showing you some things. So my recommendation is that even this week when you make web pages, you start running them through the validator, and then maybe make some mistakes and see what happens. So you begin to learn to read the error messages that are coming from the validator for the particular mistakes. Question?
Something weird came up on my computer. Can you just look at it?
Okay, so now remember what I said. I'm not going to want you to necessarily do exactly what I'm doing on my computer.
It's not about the lesson. It's just a survey thing came up.
Okay, well, if I were you, it seems to me you're very distracted by your computer. I would turn the monitor off. Because you're not able to focus on what we're doing because the computer is worrying you. Do you think you want to do that? You've got to pay attention to me, not your own computer. It's hard to be in college. We finished chapter 2. Let's go on to 3. Chapter 3. A lot of review. I'm going to come back to the favorites icon slide next week. Somebody needs to remind me. Okay? Monday, I want to do this, not today. I need to move it further in the slides, don't I? Stop being aggravated every year. This is what I want to do next. I mentioned to you on Monday that when there's a heading, like the title would be on a paper in an English class, we're going to semantically tag that as a heading. So there are 6 levels of headings, and they're considered to be levels based on importance. If it's a title for a paper in English or a title for our web page, then we're going to make it a heading level 1. If it's a subtitle to that, it's going to be a heading level 2, and we have 6 at our disposal. You can always use all 6, that's fine. What you need is always to have a heading 1. Because the screen reader is looking for it. That's how the screen reader communicates to the visually handicapped the basics of what's going on. Later, if you say, well, I'll have a heading 1, but I don't want to see it, we can do that with CSS. But for the screen reader, every page needs a heading 1. Okay? So we'll make sure we have a heading 1. Notice that the heading tags have a similar syntax. They start with an H, and then they have the number, and they are sets, so they open and close with that /. Let's add a heading to our page. The heading 1 doesn't have to be the first thing on the page. It might be the third thing, but it does need to be somewhere on the page. Let's make the page I'm not very creative. There's my heading 1. I'm going to save and refresh. Is it a block display? It is, right? Because there's a line break between it and the paragraph. By the way, nobody to show you the strong. There's a little stronger. You have a question?
Yeah, will we know which one sets like the code? I don't know if you said anything about that. Like,
Ask me again because I'm not clear on the question.
okay. When will we know? Like, are we going to learn which ones are sets and which ones are not sets?
You're learning it now. Most are. So you really just need to learn the ones that aren't. And there aren't many of those. Yes?
And the heading has to always be in the body section?
Yes. That's a great question because people will get confused between the head and the heading. The head is information for the browser, not necessarily displayed in the actual viewport. So we want all of our content, with the exception of the title and the meta, always in the body. Great distinction. Yes. Good. I'll make a heading 2. Again, heading 2 doesn't have to be after the heading 1. It is in my case. It doesn't have to be. Save that and refresh that. The formatting that you see on the heading 1s and 2, which is a larger and bolder font, is coming from the browser. The browsers have built-in formatting. We will learn how to change that to do whatever we want. But this is how it begins. It has a default formatting. It's not pretty, but it's okay. All right, that's all the headings I want to make. So let's move on. More review. The next element that we discussed is the block quote. Block quotes are long quotations. In an English paper, when you indent from both sides because you have a long quotation, that would be considered a block quote. So let's put a block quote into our page. I'm going to replace this second paragraph with a block quote. I think I'll go find a real quote. Okay, that's the most famous we use. I can get it to copy. Save that. Refresh. Notice that the block quote is like the long quote in English, indented. So you see this indent. If we would like this URL to be a link, we need to do something more, and we can do that later. I'll just leave it there for us to use in the future. I also want you to notice that the block quote does not have quotation marks around it. You could add quotation marks, although they typically aren't on a block quote, and we'll talk about quotation marks in the future. There's another element that handles quotations. The big difference between the two, semantically, is the length of the quote. A long quote would be a block quote, and a short quote would be a quote. The big difference for us that we notice in HTML is that the block quote is, as the name implies, a block display, and the quote element is an inline display. So let's get a quote in. Go to paragraph 1. I'm going to remove the strong tags for now. I'm tired of them. And I'm going to add in a quote. We haven't heard Mr. King discuss that learning has 3 stages or phases. You might want to ask him. And I think it's 3. Could be 4. So there it is. It's inline, so it's right in the middle of the paragraph. Now, when you have a quote in the middle of the paragraph, it really does need a quotation mark, don't you think? So we need to put a quotation mark on that. And as I mentioned, when we get to that, we'll add it. Right now, we'll just say it's said. Now, there's one problem with the quote element, and that is in the second bullet on this slide. Browsers normally surround the quote element with quotation marks. Now, I just put in a quote element right here. Do I have quotation marks? No. So usually it's beginning to go out of style. The W3C is the organization that defines all the standards for how HTML should be implemented by browsers. And Microsoft historically ignores about 60% of what they say. One of the things they ignored early on was the standard that said, put quotation marks around quotes. So this little tag, the quote tag, kind of fell out of favor because if we were writing a quote tag and we were looking at it in Firefox, it probably would have automatic quotation marks around it. It does, according to Eduardo. But if we were looking at it in IE, it wouldn't. And so people would say, I need to add quotation marks. And then when they added the quotation marks for IE, what happens in Firefox? There's 2 sets of quotation marks. So the poor little tag has suffered from that anomaly for years. And you guys didn't call me out. I'm depending on you a little bit more. It's not quote, it's just Q. Do you see that? It's probably why mine didn't work as well. I gotta watch. You may think I'm brilliant, but no. There we go. Maybe now I'll have my quotation marks. Yes, there they are. But if I opened it up in IE, I don't have any quotation marks. So I'd want to add them. And then, as I said, the problem occurs. The benefit, of course, to using the quote tag was that you were telling the screen reader to let the visually handicapped person know, here's a quote. So it was a good tag. It's just because Microsoft didn't want to play. It's caused all manner of trouble. The next tag is called a line break. And the line break tag is used to force a line break in the middle of something. I don't want you to use line breaks unless you're told to, because the habit of a new student is to use line breaks all the time. So get in your mind that if you read in the directions that a break is needed, a line break is needed, you need to force a line break, then I will have you add a break tag. Otherwise, I don't want to see them. You can lose a lot of points for just being break tag person. So let's say the directions say, in the middle of the long quote from Steve Jobs, add at least 1 line break. So I'm going to add one before the cause. Before I refresh, this is what it looks like. I've added a line break here in the middle of this block quote to force a new line. And don't use line breaks to decide when content ends on the side. The way that a web page works is that you want to be able to resize the window, or we call it the viewport, and have the text wrap and flow. So we don't want to force line breaks unless it's really important for some type of reason. The line break also is one of the tags that actually has no semantic meaning, because it was just because we wanted to. The biggest caution I can give you is perhaps ask before you ever use one. Make sure the directions say, make sure there's a new line break here. All right. I used a strong tag a moment ago to give importance to some content. The browser displayed the content as bold when I did that. There's also a emphasis, EM tag, which is another way to give emphasis to content, and that will display in the browser as italicized. Subscript and superscript are among these phrase elements. And then there are two that have little stars by them. See the little stars or asterisks? The bold and italic. And the W3C, the organization that makes all the rules, says you should not use B and I if there is a more semantically descriptive tag. Because B and I don't have any real meaning semantically. Now the B and the I are very popular, much more so than strong and EM. Can you guess why they're more popular?
Less keystrokes.
It's less keystrokes, and it's easy to remember. I want it bold, I put a B. I want it italicized, I put an I. But really, as a good web programmer, you should hesitate before using those and choose strong and EM instead. And remember what I'm already always telling you, we'll be able to make things look like we want in CSS. So if you put strong on it for the visually handicapped screen reader to say, this is something of strong importance, but you don't want it to be bold on your page, we'll be able to fix that. So let's use the strong and the EM, and of course, subscript and superscript you know about from chemistry, biology, subscripts there, right? H2O, and then superscripts for exponential notation in mathematics and such. Let's use the EM, because I used the strong earlier. I didn't really have any place I want to do that. Let's see if there's anywhere in the middle of this quotation. Maybe fear of embarrassment is something we want to emphasize. So I'll put the EM tag. Using my principle of nesting, I'll place it right here. That's what I want to emphasize. So it's this information right here. Watch that when I refresh, and it'll be italicized for you. But what is most important is the screen reader will let the visually handicapped user know this is important. We're just moving right along, aren't we? And some of you are thinking, we have to memorize how many of these? And the answer is all of them. I'm not going to review proper nesting, but there's a slide in case you're confused about it. I should mention, my bad, that the phrase elements are inline. They don't create a line break. So when I did add the EM, a line break did not occur there. That's appropriate. This is exactly what you would have wanted. Because we use various characters in our HTML tagging, like the less than and greater than, we need to have a way for the browser to understand it's not a tag if we need to use it. If you were doing a mathematical equation or condition in your web page, which is not uncommon, then you would need a way to put in something like a less than or greater than, so that the browser wouldn't think, here's the beginning of a tag, because it wouldn't be the beginning of a tag. Probably something that people think of more often is the copyright and the registered and trademark symbols. These, there's no way on our keyboard to type them in. So if you want to type them in, you either have to learn magical strokes on the keyboard, which involve numeric keys and alts and all, or in this case, you would put in one of these little symbols. So let's go down to the footer. Let's make a little footer, and let's add this copyright symbol so you can see how we do that. I'm going to come down to the bottom here. I'm going to make a little paragraph at the bottom. I'll call it a footer later. I'm going to put that copyright symbol. Notice that all of these start with an ampersand. Then you have some letters or words, and they end with a semicolon. So I need an ampersand copy semicolon. That will create a copyright symbol. And I'll just put 2018 clothing. Save that. There's my copyright symbol. There are actually more entity characters that are not here. Which ones do I need you to learn? No, I don't need you to learn all of them. I need you to learn the ones for quotes and non-breaking spaces and the copyright. So you need to learn the copyright. That one's kind of easy. If you type copyright, it'll be like when I typed quote, it didn't work, and then maybe your brain will say, oh, I guess it was just copy. I do need you to learn these ones for quotes and non-breaking spaces, and we'll be using those. Let's add some quotes into our content. Let's add some double quotes. So that will be LD for left double quote and right double quote. We have a good place to add it. I'm going to add it in. Well, like I said, I don't have a right place to add it, but I'm adding it anyway. So ampersand left double quote, semicolon, ampersand right double quote, semicolon. There's no real semantic meaning to quotation marks, but there they are. I don't want to print the pictures today, so I'm moving on. So now, whoever's helping me has two things to remember. We're going to do the fave icon and the pictures next week. Just say the word graphics on Monday. What do we do? Graphics. Pictures next week. Starting with HTML5, the W3C added structural elements to format a page in an organized manner. And they have semantic meaning. And they're all block elements. And please notice the subheading here. All these are coded inside the body element. Earlier we talked about that the heading went inside the body element, and I emphasized, yes, all of the visible content goes inside the body element. All of these go inside the body element. Students tend to get really confused about the header element and the headings that we did earlier, and they want to put them in the head. And I understand that confusion, but you've just got to stamp it out. The headings, H1 through 6, and that header element go in the body. Don't put other things in the head, but the title and the meta tag.
And the title is the file, right? Name of the file.
The title is what?
The name of the file.
No, the title is what we want to appear in the tab in the browser, or if we have windowed browsing in the window. If we bookmark a page, that's what we're going to see. Or favorites, if you've done that. It needs to be meaningful and not too long. So we don't have a page right now that has any of these semantic structural elements. Because we're learning HTML5 and we always want to be up to date, we're going to be using these structural elements throughout the semester and then on. But you will find a great many pages that don't have these because they're new. HTML5 is only a few years old, and in the world of IT, that's new. The header element, as you would imagine, is a good place to put a broad heading for a page. You might have H1s in there or H2s. You might even have a picture. If it feels to you when you look at the page like this big block is the heading of that page, you might call that a header. For example, I have a website where I store files for students called Weldon's Web World. Which I can clearly not spell. Forget it now? If I look at this page and I say, what to me appears to be the header? You would probably say, this information right here looks like it's the header. It's a picture, but I think this is the header. What does this look like? Links to other pages, right? So that's what we're going to call the nav element for navigation. What about this here? This could be the main part of the page. Of course, what would you call this down the bottom? That's the footer. And this is an aside or a section. If we look at this page code, you'll find that I don't have much here. I do have the header. There's a header right there. So the header, and it shows an H1, but we saw a picture. So how is that done? That's done with CSS. If I remove all the CSS from this, you would see just the words Weldon's Web World at the top, and I've chosen to make that my header. And then it goes into madness because I'm using Bootstrap. Right? So that's the header there. If we go to, who's got a page we should go to? Not something too graphical. So not Apple, not APTAC. How about Microsoft? Here's a site I maintain pro bono. Okay, so where do you think the header is? It's burgundy area, right? And what does this look like? Navigation. Is this the main? Well, it might be in the main, but it's obviously a picture that's moving. And there's a footer down at the bottom. And they look all fancy because they've got a lot of CSS. So when we are creating our websites, we want to include elements in our pages for HTML5 structural elements. We want to include header, navigation when there is navigation. That means links, and we haven't learned those yet. Main for the main part, and footer. On my Weldon's Web World, there was clearly an aside. It was over to the side even, wasn't it? The ones I want you to focus on most are these first four. Header, nav, main, and footer. And when I give you directions for assignment, it'll say something like, be sure to include the HTML5 structural elements. You should say, oh, she wants a header, footer, main. If there's any navigation, she wants that. And I've got to look at the page and figure out where that makes sense. Our page is pretty sorry, to be honest with you. But right now, I'll just make this the header. And nested inside it, I'll have this H1, and I'll even put another H2. And you can have multiple H2s. You shouldn't have multiple H1s. So, let's get into the header. I don't have any links to navigate, so I'm going to open up the main and put the rest of this in the main until I get down to what is already, clearly, a little footer. All of these are inside the body. Here's your footer. Here's your main. Right there. And then here's your header. Now when I save this and refresh it in the browser, I added an H2, that's why there was a change in appearance. But that really was the only change in appearance. So you don't see a big change in appearance when you add these. Long discussions about each one. This is with pictures, so I'm going to wait on this. Remember, pictures are Monday. I keep saying that, so hopefully on Monday I'll remember. This is what I want to do next. So let's work on this for our last thing today. If you're presenting a list on your web page of items, a list of items, then you will want to choose one of the 3 list semantic tags. You must first decide if the list order matters or not. If it doesn't matter, then you will choose one of the first 2 on the slide, unordered or description. If the order matters, then most likely you will choose ordered list. So the ordered list is for a list of items where the order matters. Unordered is a list of items where the order does not matter. And description list is when you're going to have something like a term with a description. And we're going to add all 3 of these to our little web page. The unordered list is a block element, so it's going to force that line break. It begins and ends with a UL, and inside of the UL tag set, nested, are the individual list items, or LIs. Here's an example of an unordered list. I open the UL tag set and I close it. In between, I nest each of the items I want in the list. Notice that when you add an unordered list, the browser automatically puts bullets beside it. You can change that, but that's what happens right at the gate. Let's add an unordered list after our heading 2 that says all about list. Notice I'm closing tags as I open them so I don't forget. I'm going to put a list of classes I'm teaching. If I type so poorly, I'm going to use some copy paste to make this go faster. So I have an opening UL, closing UL. In between I have LIs, list items, and each one of those is open and closed as well. In the browser, it's an unordered list, which is represented by an indented, bulleted list. And notice that every single list item is on its own line because it's a block display. It's not on its own line because I put it there. I could do it like this. It would be ugly, but I could do this. So now it looks like there should just be 3 lines. But if I save that and refresh it, I see no change because, as we mentioned on Monday and again today, those line breaks and spaces don't really mean a lot in between tags. It's on its own line because it's a block display. Do I think we should write it this way? No, it's hard to read. You agree? It's harder to read. So let's make things easy to read. That's easier to read. Now the only difference between a unordered and ordered list is that you've decided the order mattered. Okay? And all that you do to change an unordered list to an ordered list is change the U to an O. Couldn't be simpler. And then they're numbered. The numbers can be Roman numerals, little a's, i's, but we do that with CSS. So don't worry about that at this time. The description list is a little uglier. So I think we'll stop today and not do the description list. So we will begin with the description list, and then we'll probably be ready to get on the pictures. I would recommend that you look over the assignment that is due next week, begin to see what's there, think to yourself, if I was doing this page, what does it look like I need? Does it look like this is a paragraph? Does this look like an unordered list? Look at the screenshot at the top of those directions of next week, obviously once you finish this week's assignment. And before you read all the directions I've given you, say, can I figure out what she probably wants? And then when you read the directions, you'll see if you were right about that. And then you can start trying to make it. You have a lot of skills towards making your assignment next week. You would start with a root folder. I tell you what I want you to name it. You would begin to type in all the content. Always type it in new. Do not use old pages because we want to get you to memorize. And if you get an old page that you've done and you just keep copying it, you don't learn the same way as if you type it in. Big questions before we leave today? Yes, sir.
Just when we start a new file, we type in index, right?
The one we did today, we made it the home page. And that means we named it index.html. Let me reinforce that by looking at this domain. This domain is www.ncpcaiken.org. There's no file name on here, .html. So when we type in that domain name, the web server loads the default page, the home page. Weldon's Web World was the same way. Aiken Tech would be the same way. You always have a home page that will load automatically if someone only types in the domain. And
Okay,
in
so,
this class, we're naming that index.html.
okay, so index HTML always equals homepage.
Always. So in the directions, you'll see things like this. Name the home page appropriately. So what do I want you to name it?
Index.html.
Right. Do I want you to name it home page?
No.
No. The file name, of course, is what we're talking about. The file name will be index.html. Good clarification. These are good questions. Because he gets right to the heart of the new stuff. I like that. So we can review it one more time. Okay, that's all we have today. Remember your assignment's 2 by 3. You owe me an hour in the lab this week. You know, you'll get harassing emails over the weekend saying, what's going on? If you came in after the roll was called, you need to come up here and check in with me or you'll be marked absent.